So it's time to continue on reading The 12 Days of Christmas by Debbie Macomber. Today is World Kindness Day. This book is about kindness. I hope that you do an act of kindness and expect nothing in return other than a thank you. When someone asks you, how can I return you the favor? Say, don't let the chain of love end with you, meaning pay it on. And if you've never heard of that song that Clay Walker sang, Chain of Love, this is a great time to check it out. Now, Debbie Macomber's 12 Days of Christmas, Chapter 4. Julia posted her blog. Within 5 minutes, she had dozens of hits and 20 comments. It seemed like everyone had something to say. Several were helpful and some were downright funny. Believe in love. Don't be discouraged. The fact that he's fighting so hard shows that you're having an effect on him. Ain't gonna take it. Sneak rat poison into his coffee. Oh, wait, he doesn't want that either. Find a way. Single mom. I met someone like him. In fact, I married him. Run. Sister, run. Don't look back. Several comments boiled down to simple message of, don't give up now. Reading the comments helped so by the time that Julia left to join the choir members Saturday morning, her annoyance with Cain had more or less dissipated. To her surprise, he was leaving his apartment at the same time she was. He seemed equally taken aback to see her. You work on Saturdays? She asked as they walked toward the elevator. No, you? Not today. It seemed to take the elevator an extra long time to reach the 3rd floor, and when it did arrive, he held open the door for her to precede him, so he could be a gentleman when so inclined. It's going to be a great day. He arched his eyebrow as if he questioned her. I doubt that. Rain is in the forecast. The streets are clogged with traffic. People are pushing and shoving on the sidewalk, crazed with Christmas madness. If that's a good day for you, then you're a better person than I am. Thank you, Mr. Glad Tidings, she teased. As you might have guessed, I love the holiday season. She waited, and then he didn't comment, and she added, You forgot your line. My line? He arched a brow as in question as they reached the lobby and entered the foyer. Aren't you supposed to say bah humbug? For just a moment, fleeting as it was, she thought she saw him smile. If so, he quickly disguised it behind his usual emotionless expression. He shook his head as they left the lobby, but then he waited and held the glass door open for her. Thank you. That was twice now that he held a door for her, something that he had never done to this point. She supposed that was progress. Her readers would say that little signs should encourage her, and they did. You're welcome, Cain said. They parted ways on the sidewalk, and Cain went in one direction and she in the other. She made a brief stop at Starbucks and to her disappointment discovered Phil wasn't working. She'd catch him later and hoped that he'd be able to remember his conversation with Cain. She needed to know what Cain was curious to find out about her. Julia was just one of the first to arrive at the Manor House, the assisted living complex on Beacon Hill. She wanted to be sure that everything was set up and ready for the choral group and the piano was in place. She visited earlier with the choral director and told the staff what they would need. Sure enough, several rows of chairs were already arranged in a large area of the dining room. Many of the elderly patrons had to be escorted from their rooms. A number of them used walkers. Julia stood in the entry and greeted each resident as he or she progressed into the room, wishing them a Merry Christmas. Nothing could have shocked her more when she saw Cain accompany an elderly man. When he caught sight of her, his eyes narrowed with what looked like suspicion and doubt. After he got the older man settled into a chair in the 2nd row, he walked over to where she stood. Could I talk to you for a minute? Sure. Not here, he said gruffly. Then where? He led out the way down the hall and around the corner out of sight of the residents and staff. Did you follow me? Her eyes felt like they were about to bug out of her head. Follow you? You mean here? Or, of course not. Why in the name of heaven would I do something like that? Then what are you doing here? Julia stiffened and did her utmost to remain calm and serene. I have my reasons, she assured him. His arrogance was beyond measure. Are you stalking me? You think I'm stalking you? The idea was so ludicrous she burst out laughing. If the twitch in his jaw was anything to go by, Cain wasn't amused. I find it all too convenient that you seem to turn up everywhere that I do. First is at Starbucks, then the lobby when I'm collecting my mail. And what's the deal with you just happening to be at the elevator every morning? I can't even shop without running into you. I don't know how you planned all this, but I want it to stop, and I want it to stop now." Julia closed her eyes before her temper blew, because if she didn't, he'd regret his accusations. When she composed herself enough to respond, she held up her index finger. 1. I was collecting my mail first. You intruded on me. 2. She held up a second finger. You can rest assured that I will take great pains to avoid catching the elevator at the same time as you from this point forward, and I would rather miss my bus than ride with you ever again. And 3. A third finger snapped up. I'm clever, but I'm not clever enough to arrange to be working at the exact place and time that you decide to shop. And 4, she was breathlessly had 4 fingers up by now. I have every single right to be in Starbucks, and if you don't like it, then I suggest you get your coffee elsewhere. Dragging in a calming breath, she added, "Now, if you excuse me, there's a reason I'm here, and it has nothing to do with you." She started to walk away and then whirled back to confront him nose to nose. "And for the record, you are the most arrogant, unpleasant man that I have ever known." The experiment was over. She couldn't do it any longer. Stepping into the restroom, Julia locked the door and leaned against it. She took a few minutes to compose herself, holding her hand up to her face. Her cheeks were hot. With barely restrained anger, it took several moments for her breathing to return to normal. Knowing that she'd be required to play for the singing group, Julia wetted a paper towel and pressed it to her face. When she felt like she could smile again, she came out of the restroom. The choral group had arrived, and Julia slid onto the piano bench. Mrs. Bounds, the choir director, stood before the audience and introduced herself. "We are pleased to be here this morning to share a few of our choir Christmas selections for your enjoyment. Julia Payton will accompany us on the piano." Julia didn't dare look into the audience. For all she knew, Kane had left, which was what she had hoped he'd done. The man was insufferable. Until 15 minutes ago, she thought that she'd made progress. It was really 1 step forward and 10 steps back when it came to this jerk. Mrs. Bounds faced the choral group and raised her arms and looked right at Julia, whose fingers were poised over the piano keys. At Mrs. Bounds' signal, she started playing. As always seemed to happen, as soon as she got immersed in the music and the tension evaporated from between her shoulder blades, unable to rest, she looked to where she'd first seen Kane. He sat next to the same man she'd seen him with earlier. Their eyes locked, and for one intense moment the room faded away and it was just the two of them. The blank, emotionless expression that was his trademark had been replaced with a look of regret. Before she could read anything more, her attention was drawn back to the choir and Mrs. Bounds. Regretful or not, Julia was finished with him, with this experiment, with everything. Even if it meant she would lose the chance at this job. Her stomach was in knots. She desperately wanted this job, but not at the expense of her sanity. When the performance was over, Julia stepped outside and called Cammy, who happened to be grocery shopping. It took her best friend all of 2 seconds to figure out why she was upset. "Julia, what's wrong?" She blurted out the entire story and finished with, "I'm giving up the blog." "You can't," Cammy cried. "Have you looked at the numbers on your post you put up yesterday? You've got over 1,000 hits with 200 shares. Do you have any idea how big that is?" "I just can't do it any longer," Julia insisted. "You can," Cammy encouraged. "Think about it. Don't overreact. Yes, Kane is difficult, and you have every right to be upset. But there's a reason he's the way he is. It's your job to find out what makes him tick. He's arrogant, and wasn't he all that before you started this blog?" Her friend had a point. As much as Julia wanted to argue with her, she couldn't. "Yes, I guess. Then nothing has really changed, has it?" Julia straightened. As much as she hated to admit it, Cammy was right. 1,000 hits, her bestie replied. That was way beyond the interest Julia had been able to generate before. "People are loving your blog and this project. When you get a chance, read the comments posted in the last couple of hours." "I will for sure." Julia tapped her foot while she was considering this news. "You say Kane accused you of following him?" "Yes, the man is delusional." His accusation continued to inflame her. "You could have claimed that he followed you, you know. Kane was there for a reason." As always, Cammy had said exactly what Julia needed to hear. Kane hadn't just shown up at the manor house out of the blue because he was in the mood for a bit of Christmas cheer. She suspected he had a friend or relative at the complex, or was there out of some obligation. "Thanks, Cammy. I'll check in with you later." "Do that, and keep your cool." "I will." With a plan in place, she returned to the building and stepped up to the reception's desk. "Do you have a residence here with the surname of Maddox?" she asked, doing her best to give the impression of goodwill toward all men. The woman behind the counter smiled. Yes, that would be Bernie, nicest man you'll ever meet. Charming and sweet. Charming and sweet? Clearly he was no relation to Kane. She would like to seek out Bernie right then, but she feared Kane might still be in the building. She'd return at a later date and introduce herself and find out what she could about Kane, and if indeed they were related. The more she knew about him, the better she was prepared to show him kindness, even if she had to do it with gritted teeth. Before she was finished, Kane Maddox would rue the day he met her. And the Julia's blog, 12 Days of Christmas, December 17th. A smile. My friends, I have a small confession to make. I nearly abandoned this project after my last encounter with Ebenezer. I've never met a more frustrating man in my life. He actually accused me of stalking him. I happened to be in the same place as him. Truthfully, it was sort of spooky, but stalking him? Please. This experiment has gone from a mission to a battle, and at the moment, the opposition, which is Ebenezer, is winning. A woman can only take so much. It just so happened that I had an excellent reason for being where I was, one he discovered soon enough. I know he regretted his accusation, but did he apologize? Did he admit that he was in the wrong? Not Ebenezer. When I next looked for him, he disappeared, and truthfully, that was probably for the best, because I wasn't in an exactly forgiving mood. Then this afternoon, though no fault of my own, I inadvertently met Ebenezer in the lobby of our apartment building. I waited for him to accuse me of having prearranged that as well. Thankfully, he didn't. Instead, he seemed to be in a much better mood. I, however, wasn't. I glared at him, daring him to say a single word. You won't be able to guess what he did. He smiled. Yes, he smiled as if nothing had happened. As if I should forget what he said and pretend everything was all right with the world. I, however, am unwilling to ignore his error in judgment. And then he added insult to my already injured pride, and he said he might find me attractive if I wasn't so cheerful in the mornings. As if I would even want him to find me attractive. Can you believe this guy? That just did it. I'm not quitting. If anything, I'm going to be all the more merry and bright. I'll blind him with how upbeat and sunny I'm going to be. What I didn't expect that killing him with kindness would be the death of me. But I can do this, thanks to you and the encouragement that you've given me. Wish me luck. Chapter 5. When Julia asked for encouragement, it came in the form of more than 200 comments. This blog had grown at a shocking pace. By the following afternoon, her latest entry had more than 3,000 views and 500 shares, in addition to pages and pages of comments. Wow! Even though it was the weekend, Julia checked the hallway before leaving the apartment for fear she might inadvertently happen upon Kane on his way out. It wasn't likely, seeing that it was Sunday, but she wasn't taking a chance. She'd taken Saturday off and therefore was working Sunday instead, which bummed her out. It was the holiday season, and the store and the other sales representatives depended on one another to carry their own weight. One day, God willing, she'd be able to work a 9-to-5 job doing social media. Julia had to believe that, or she'd be really depressed. While waiting at the bus stop, Julia watched it as her favorite barista shot out of the door of Starbucks. Phil was excited as he rushed up to greet her. "Julia, you'll never guess what." "What?" she said, watching that metro bus approach the stop. "That guy, Kane, I think that's his name. He was in earlier this morning, and he bought you a drink, a peppermint mocha. Said it was your favorite." Phil held up a drink for her to see. "Kane? Bought me this?" She was so shocked she could barely get the words out. "You're kidding." "He said to give it to you the next time you stopped in, but I saw you waiting here and whipped it right up. I thought you'd want to know." "You said he asked about me the other morning," she said. "What did he want to know?" The bus arrived and people started to board. "He asked if you were always a cheerful pest in the morning, or if it was an act to put on for his benefit. I told him you were always kind and friendly." "Thanks, Phil." I didn't really answer his question, and he noticed so. I don't know if that was any help or not. He might have thought that I liked you because you're thoughtful enough to leave a tip. In retrospect, I should have told him that you're upbeat and personable, because you are. The bus driver leaned forward and opened the door. "You getting on or not?" "I'll let you know if he asks anything more," Phil said, "but I've got to get back inside." "Yeah, later." Flustered, Julie took the grand-sized cup that Phil held out to her and boarded the bus. She found a seat and held onto the drink with both hands. Kane had bought her this drink? The very one she mentioned a few days earlier as being her favorite holiday? The way she figured, this was about as close to an apology as she was going to get. This was big, as in gigantic. Clenching her fist, she nearly thrust her arm up and let out a shout for victory. The thick wall Kane had built around himself had cracked. Surely he'd held the door open for her and given her that smile, and that looked like it pained him, sort of like he was trying to turn up the top of a rusted shut jar lid. This peppermint mocha, however, was solid proof. Kindness was working, and she only began to scratch the surface. She could hardly wait to tell Cammie and update her blog. Her readers were going to eat it up. Following her shift at the department store, instead of returning to the apartment to put her feet up and write the Christmas cards, Julia made an impromptu visit to the Manor House, the assisted living complex where the choir had performed the day before. The complex was beautifully decorated for the holidays because of all the extra holiday hours she worked at Macy's. Plus her volunteer efforts, she hadn't put up her own Christmas tree. Her plan had been to do that very day if time allowed. The woman at the front desk looked up and smiled as Julia approached. "I'd like to see Bernie Maddox," she said. "Are you a relative?" "No, I was here on Saturday with the church group." "Oh, yes, that was lovely. The residents talked about it for a long time afterward. Everyone enjoyed the music." She glanced down at the residence sheet. "Bernie's in room 316, but I don't think you'll find him there." "Oh, is he out for the day?" "No, he isn't listed as having left the building. Bernie tends to spend a lot of time on the 5th floor in the game room. My guess that's where he'll be." "Thanks," Julia said appreciatively. Then, fearing she might run into Kane, which in her opinion would be nothing less than disastrous, she asked, "He doesn't happen to have any company, does he?" The woman whose name tag identified her as Sharon shook her head. "Not that I know of." "Okay, thanks. Bernie, one of the kindest residents we have, a real gentleman." That would be a startling contrast to Kane Maddox. They had to be related, seeing as they shared the same last surname. Julia took the elevator to the 5th floor and wandered down the wide hallway until she found the game room. Sure enough, Bernie Maddox sat at a large table, holding on to a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. After a careful examination, he set it back down and reached for another, studying it with a frowning intensity. "Are you Bernie Maddox?" she asked, although she knew that he was. He was the man that she recognized with Kane from the day before. Bernie glanced up. "That's me." His eyes narrowed briefly. "Do I know you? You look vaguely familiar." "I was here yesterday with the church group. I played the piano." "Oh, yes, now I remember. What can I do for you?" Julia pulled out a chair and sat down beside him. "I live in the same apartment building as Kane Maddox. Are you two related?" "Kane's my grandson. Is he in any kind of trouble?" Interesting that Bernie would ask that particular question. She was half tempted to explain that Kane was trouble, but that wouldn't have been fair. No, at least not that I know of. Does he get in trouble often?" "If he does, he sure doesn't tell me about it. You know Kane?" "Unsure how to best answer that," she said, "sort of. His apartment is across the hall from mine, so we see each other fairly often. Let me put it like this. Kane isn't exactly the neighborly sort." "Sounds like my grandson. That boy had a bad attitude, especially when it comes to women. Been that way for a good 5 years." He paused and then studied Julia's eyes, a twinkling. "You got the hots for Kane?" Julia's head snapped back in shock. Not really." The question flustered and caught her off guard. She could feel the color invading her cheeks. "Kane's an interesting person." She wasn't sure how best to describe him, which left her stumbling over her own words. "Giving you the cold shoulder, is he?" "Something like that." Julia made a quick decision she would tell Bernie about her experiment. "We had something of a run-in recently. Kane took my newspaper, and well, it made me so mad that I complained to a friend. Cammie's got a big, generous heart, and she suggested the best way to deal with Kane was to kill him with kindness." Her words hung in the air for an awkward moment before Bernie slapped his knee and laughed boisterously. "You're killing Kane with kindness? Tell me, how's that working for you?" "At the moment, not so well, although I got a bit of encouragement this morning." "Oh?" Bernie was all ears. "Kane bought me a latte from Starbucks." She explained the circumstances of how he arranged it for her. The old man's eyes widened. "He went to all that trouble? Seems to me that you're getting him good, girl." "It isn't like that." Julia felt as if she had to explain. "I believe this is about as close as Kane's going to get to apologizing to me for the way he acted yesterday." Bernie's face folded with concern. "What did he do yesterday?" Julia told him how Kane had accused her of following him and had basically warned her off. "Why'd he think that?" She explained that as well, which meant at this point she'd done the majority of the talking. That wasn't so bad, except she'd come here to learn what she could about Kane. Instead of being upset, Bernie chuckled. "In other words, you've been in his face for the last few days. I just can't imagine his reaction to that. You've made escaping you nearly impossible for my boy. It's wonderful. I love it." "He doesn't make it easy. I baked him cookies which he refused." Bernie shook his head. "Bet they were chocolate chip." "They were." "That thought as much. He won't eat them, but I'll gladly take them. Been a month of Sunday since I tasted homemade baked cookies." A good portion of the batch had gone into the break room at Macy's, but she'd held back a dozen or more. Bernie was dear, just the way the receptionist claimed. Julia decided then and there to make the remainder go to Bernie. "I delivered his newspaper to his apartment, too, until he demanded that I stop." "Not even a thank you?" "No." Bernie grinned. "Seeing as he left you that fancy coffee drink, my guess is he's struggling with what he feels." "I make sure we leave for work around the same time every morning. It wasn't like Kane could avoid her, but I won't any longer." She seemed determined earlier, but not after this latest episode. Bernie frowned. "Why not?" "Well, because he thinks I'm stalking him." "You listen to me, Julia. Don't you change a single thing. If he doesn't want to take the elevator with you, then he can just use the stairs." Julia liked the sound of that. "Kane doesn't like me much," she confessed. "That's fine, and I didn't expect that he would." Although she wasn't willing to admit it, she started to have feelings for Kane. Not necessarily romantic ones. She found that she wanted to know more about what made him tick. "Think you're wrong about that?" Bernie said with a thoughtful look. "He's attracted to you, but knowing my grandson, he's fighting it tooth and nail." "Doubt it. He said I'd be far more attractive if I wasn't so cheerful in the mornings." Bernie laughed so hard Julia was afraid he was about to fall out of his chair. "That boy hasn't got a romantic bone in his body. He probably thought he was giving you a compliment." Julia wanted to clear up any misconception. "I'm not interested in Kane romantically." Her comment sobered Bernie in a quick order. "Why not? He needs a pretty girl like you in his life." Rather than explain that Kate Maddox was the last person on earth that she'd date, she said, "He isn't open to a relationship. Not with me at any rate. And from what she'd seen of him, not with anyone. He's interested. I know my grandson. You might not realize it, but buying you that frou-frou coffee was a major concession on his part." Julia thought it was best to change the subject. "Can you tell me why Kane's so standoffish?" She searched for that right word. Standoffish sounded better than cold or mean-spirited, both of which she once considered him to be. Bernie's amusement faded quickly. "The boy hasn't had an easy life. His mother abandoned him when Kane was around 4. Our son knew nothing about raising a child on his own, so he brought Kane to me and my wife. Carl, that was our son, was broken-hearted after his wife left him. He never did recover emotionally, nor did he bond with his son the way he should have. He felt guilty about that, and after a while he stopped coming around." "Oh, basically both Kane's parents had abandoned him." Bernie continued. "Kane needed his father, and I tried to fill in the best I could, but it wasn't the same." Julia was beginning to feel terrible for judging him. "Then our son died in a car accident. Kane was about 12 at the time. He took his father's death hard. Did he ever connect with his mother?" Bernie shook his head sadly. "Fortunately, my grandson was close to my wife, but then she died about 3 years after Carl." "Oh, dear." Julia sank lower in her chair. "Her illness came at a crucial time in Kane's life. He was going to high school, and until that point had always gotten good grades. I'm afraid I wasn't much help grieving as I was." Julia placed her hand on Bernie's arm. "I'm so sorry. It's only years ago. One adjusts, although you never fully recover from the loss of a loved one. I sort of figured out a way to walk around the black hole in my life, and I did the best I could, but it wasn't nearly enough. Thankfully, he wasn't the kind of teen to get into trouble or anything like that. He sank himself, grew quiet and withdrawn. It's like he was afraid to let anyone too close for fear that they would abandon him." Julia had almost afraid to ask the following question. "Has Kane had any meaningful relationships? Romantic ones, you mean?" She nodded. Bernie rubbed the side of his face as he mulled over the question. He doesn't share a lot with me. After his grandmother's death, Cain seemed to turn off his emotions, sort of the same way his father did when Gail left him. I know there was this one woman a few years back. They worked together. Cain had become a mentor to her. Then I suspect they became more. How much more I can't say, but I do know that Cain was serious about her for the simple reason he mentioned her a few times. It encouraged me that he was willing to open himself up. Then there was nothing, and the light went out of his eyes. What happened? Bernie shook his head. I was never completely sure, but reading between the lines, I got the impression that this woman cozied up to him in order to gain his favor for a promotion. I assumed once she got what she wanted, she dumped him. Julia briefly closed her eyes. That explained a lot. I've asked him about his social life, but he refuses to answer any or quickly change the subject. Every ugly thought Julia had entertained about Cain vanished. Learning about his family and the woman who used him for her own personal gain changed her perspective. Now you can clearly see why I think this kindness experiment that you mentioned is exactly what my grandson needs. I feel terrible. Why? Bernie asked. Julia was sure guilt was written all over her face. I haven't been exactly thinking kind thoughts about Cain. No worries, those will come in time. The comment struck her as odd. They will? What makes you say that? You'll see. Right away he changed the subject. By chance, do you happen to know how to play cribbage? I do. My grandfather taught me. Bernie's face lit up like a Christmas Eve candlelight service. You got time to humor an old man? Sure. You think you can beat me? I can try. Julia ended up spending an hour with Bernie, the cribbage board on the table between them. Bernie was happy to tell her the story after story about Cain until she felt she knew far more about him than she ever imagined she would. Cain ever mention his dog? You mean Schroeder? No, Bogey. No, I can't say that he has, but then they weren't exactly on the most friendly of terms. Raised Bogey from a pup, loved that dog like he was human. The two of them did everything together. Bogey lived until he was 11, which is old for a large dog. Devastated Cain when he had to put him down. I wanted to get him another dog, raise him too, but Cain refused, said he had his dog. But he has Schroeder now. Schroeder was my dog. Couldn't have him here at the manor house, so Cain agreed to take him. I know he sees to his knees, but I worry that Schroeder isn't getting the TLC that he used to. He looked at her as if he could tell him what he wanted to know. I can't say, but I do know that Cain walks Schroeder every day. Bernie's expression sobered. Cain doesn't show a lot of emotion. He keeps it the way he feels, locked up inside. I'm hoping that this kindness project of yours will make a difference. It's what he needs and a lot more. They played several games of cribbage. It's grown dark by the time Julia prepared to leave. She collected her coat and purse and thanked the older man. Bernie and I had a wonderful afternoon, and I can't thank you enough. The pleasure was all mine. Can't remember the last time I enjoyed a visitor more. I hope you come again. I will, and I'll bring you those cookies next time I stop by. Wouldn't turn them down like my foolish grandson. Leaning forward, Julia kissed his weathered cheek. It might not be a good idea to mention our visit to Cain. Not a good idea at all, Bernie agreed. Keep me updated on your progress. A 12-day experiment, you say? 12 days, and this is day 5. For a number of reasons, she didn't mention the blog, mostly because it didn't seem relevant. She wasn't sure that he would know what a blog was. I'll stop by again soon. Good, and I'll look forward to that more than you know. Furthermore, I'll demand a rematch, he said, putting away the cribbage board. Your grandfather did a good job of teaching you. You're one fine opponent. Julia considered that high praise. Despite the hour, Julia stopped off at the Christmas tree lot on her way back to the apartment and then purchased a large wreath and a small tree. It was awkward getting both home on her own, but when she got back to the elevator, she saw a sign that read, "Temporarily out of order." Just great, she muttered under her breath, her shoulders sagging with defeat. It's been a long day, and here she was dead on her feet. What is? Cain stood behind her and a take-out bag in his hand. Julia shot him a look. The elevator is out of order. A huge grin came across his face. Looks like you're up a creek with a Christmas tree. She paused, unable to look away. Cain was so attractive, man, when he smiled. And while she hated to admit it, he was good-looking, even when he didn't, which, in her humble opinion, was grossly unfair. This isn't funny. On the contrary, I look forward to watching you haul that tree up 2 flights of stairs to the 3rd floor. He walked over to the door leading to the stairs and held it open. Ya coming? Julia wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Go on ahead of me. You wouldn't want your dinner to get cold, now would you? And miss seeing you struggle with that tree? Not on your life. I'm happy you think this is amusing. Come on, he urged, tilting his head toward the stairwell. I'm not a doorstop, you know. Julia dug her fist into her hip bone. In case you haven't noticed, I could use some help here. Kane cocked his eyebrow. Do you want me to contact the building manager for you? The man was infuriating. Ignoring him as best as she could, Julia carried that bushy fir tree up to the stairwell. The Christmas tree might not be big, but it was less than 4 feet tall. But it was heavy. Determined to ignore him, she marched up the first few steps and then the hall to the second floor, before she had to pause and rest the base of the tree on the concrete step. Leaning against the railing, she glared at Kane. He was seriously going to let her do this all on her own. If nothing else, it would make great blog material. No one would doubt it was a true Ebenezer moment. I suppose I should thank you for the latte, she said, while gathering her breath. Collected it already, did you? Phil brought it out to the bus stop for me this morning. Peppermint mocha's my favorite. You remembered. Crossing his arms, he seemed perfectly content to wait for her. I should have refused it, she said, stiffening. Why would you do that? You did. He wagged his finger like a pendulum. Different situation. Whatever. What about the cookies? You refused those too. I'm watching my weight. He didn't have a spare ounce of fat on him. That was an excuse if she ever heard one. In other circumstances, she would have called him out on it. At least they were talking, and while it might not be the most fun conversation, it was improvement over the last couple of days. She hauled the tree up the rest of the flight and paused on the landing. I hope you realize that the comment about you stalking me was low. He shrugged. It was. Are you going to apologize? She challenged him with a hard look. Kane met her gaze for a half a second and looked as if he was in danger of smiling. How about I help you haul that tree up to the 3rd floor instead? Julia was no fool. Deal. He took the tree out of her hand and effortlessly climbed the remaining stairs. Julia followed behind the wreath, and breathlessly by the time they reached their floor, Kane stood outside her door, and then she dug in her purse for her keys. Were you serious about not getting in the elevator with me again? He asked as she inserted the key and opened the apartment. I've had a change of heart. Not that we need worry about the meeting at the elevator now that it's out of order. Good point. If by chance it's working tomorrow morning and I happen to leave for work the same time as you, then I would suggest you take the stairs or wait. He cocked his head to one side. You wouldn't want me to be late for work, would you? She gave a nonchalant shrug. Your choice. I'll take the elevator with you, Kane said as he carried the tree into her apartment. Where do you want this? By the window. She had to analyze what he just said. Are you saying you don't mind my sunny disposition and cheerful chatter? That isn't what I said. Then what did you mean? Ignoring her question, he leaned against the tree against the window. You have a tree stand? I do, but you didn't answer my question. He frowned. About catching the elevator, it's just what I said. I don't want to be late for work, and I wouldn't want you to miss your bus. You could leave earlier, you know. You could too, no biggie. Do whatever makes you comfortable. Kane would rather submit to torture than hint that he enjoyed her company. Are you going to get that tree stand or not? He prompted. Leaving him, Julia went into her bedroom and stretched up to the top shelf of her closet and brought down the box of Christmas essentials, including the tree stand. Here, he instructed once she returned, hold on to the tree and I'll set it up for you. Julia grabbed a hold of the center of the tree and he knelt down on the floor and fitted the trunk into the stand. I appreciate the help, she told him, and she did. It amazed her that the day before she'd been ready, eager, even to throttle Kane Maddox. The difference in his attitude toward her from one day to the next was shocking. Kane, what? He muttered. Why are you helping me? He leaned back on his haunches and looked up at her, frowning. Would you rather I didn't? No, I'm just surprised, that's all. He leaned forward, flattening his hands on his thighs. If you must know, I decided you don't have any untoward intentions toward me, and I don't know what this Merry Sunshine Act you've got going on is all about, but I've sort of gotten used to it. Julia did her best to hide a smile. You go overboard, but I can live with that. Big of you, she muttered. He chuckled. I decided you were right. You couldn't possibly have known I needed a birthday gift from my grandfather and planted yourself in Macy's men department store. Nor did I follow you to the manor house. Right. Returning to setting up the tree, he fiddled with the screws in the stand, and as he spoke, you have to admit, though, you have been making a pest of yourself. You really didn't just say that. It was agonizingly slow progress with this guy. I'm not being critical, but it seems that you're hard up for a man. Her mouth shot open. Hard up for a man? She repeated as the outrage built until she was afraid she was going to explode. Don't get me wrong, I'm flattered. Julia let go of the tree and it fell over sideways, hitting her small kitchen table before bouncing to the floor. Hey, Kane barked, why'd you do that? I've got 3 or 4 screws in. Out, she shouted and pointed toward the door. A look of bafflement came over him. What's your problem? First off, I am not hard up for a man, and if I was, I can assure you that you would be the last man in Seattle who would interest me. His eyes crinkled with a smile, something he didn't do nearly often enough. Evidence says otherwise. Thank you, Sherlock. In thinking about it, Kane must assume that she was blatantly flirting with him. It would be hard to convince him otherwise, seeing how she repeatedly made efforts to get his attention in the sort of that made sense, but she hadn't considered when she'd taken on this experiment. Get over yourself, Julia. Do you want me to get this tree in the stand or not? Your choice. Julia weighed her options. She could remain mad and then struggle to get it up on her own, or swallow her pride and let him do it. Okay, fine, finish. Kane straightened the tree and Julia clasped the middle of it while he adjusted the last screw. She remained tight-lipped, unwilling to hand him an additional ammunition to use against her. Kane broke the silence with a question. How long have you been playing the piano? I thought you considered my music noisy racket. He made a big scene about it only a few days ago. I had a big headache that night. Oh. I suppose you're looking for an apology for that, as well as everything else. Not particularly. Good, because I wasn't going to give you one. He finished and leaned on his haunches again. Is it straight? Julia stepped back and examined the tree before she nodded. It is, thank you. I'd say it was my pleasure, but it was more a pain in the butt. Then why did you do it? He was really the most exasperating person. Well, for one, you needed help. For two, I'm a bit taken back to find that I don't dislike you nearly as much as I thought. Julia laughed and pressed her hand over her heart. Who knew? Knew what? He asked, looking up with a quizzical expression. That you could be such a silver-tongued devil. Kane laughed. He bounced back to his feet and grabbed his take-out bag. See you in the morning. Not until her apartment door closed did Julia realize that he was basically telling her that he'd meet her at the elevator. Julia's blog, 12 Days of Christmas, December 18. He's not my type. Wow, do you know how to have a girl's back? I read all your comments and suggestions and wanted to thank everyone who contacted me. And never fear, I'm filled with more determination to continue than ever. And guess what? The biggest encouragement I got came from Ebenezer himself. Yes, you read that right. The thick wall around this unpleasant man has shown itself a major crack. He bought me a latte, which I'm sure was his way of letting me know that he regretted his accusations from Saturday. Talk about being surprised. It's almost as if he's reading my blog himself, which I can assure you that he isn't. And he gave me all the incentive that I need to continue. Furthermore, he's talking to me now. I mean, as talking as in a regular conversation, other than terse one-word answers. I learned something from him. I learned something else from him, something that he told me himself. He asked if I would be at the elevator in the morning. Simple question, right? After the fiasco on Saturday, I'd been determined to rearrange my schedule so we wouldn't meet. I went so far to tell him so. While he didn't come out right out and admit it, he looks for me now. He actually looks for me. And while he might still complain about my morning cheerfulness, I believe he secretly enjoys it. Oh, and I met his grandfather and got some insider information. As I suspected, Ebenezer had a woman do him wrong. That has apparently soured him on relationships. No surprise there, right? When he was helping me set up my Christmas tree, he implied that I'm romantically interested in him, and actually said that I was hard up for a man. I guess he couldn't go more than a few minutes without irritating me. I did my best to hold my tongue, far be it from me to be accused of flirting with him. He's really not my type. No way. Not interested. We'll report back tomorrow. Chapter 6. Julia sort of hated to admit, but she was looking forward to seeing Kane on Monday morning. She listened at her front door for what seemed like forever, but he didn't show. Her goal was to make it look like their meeting up at the same time every morning was pure accident. It wasn't, of course, but she pulled this little trick more than once. As time ran out with no option left, she had to leave or miss the bus. Kane was a no-show. Either he left earlier than normal or he was running late. The temptation to tap on his door was strong, but she resisted. Giving him the wrong impression about her intentions made Julia extra cautious. Letting him think that she might be interested in him romantically wasn't part of the experiment. Still, he made a point of the two of them to connect that morning. She couldn't help but wonder what the deal was. Knowing him, it was probably a ruse to keep him guessing and on her toes. That would be just like Kane. The closer it got to Christmas, the crazier her workday became. Shoppers crowded the store, searching out for the perfect gift at the best price. Being this busy made time pass quickly for Julia. During her lunch break, she barely had time to grab a few bites as she read the comments on her blog. The number of hits had doubled. Doubled! Sassy Susan. See? Knew it was working. So glad you stuck with the plan. Met his grandfather, did you? Devious little devil you turned out to be. Jingle Bell Girl. Who says he's not your type? He bought you a latte. What more do you want? And the comments went on for pages. People were loving this project and giving her all kinds of encouragements. What the readers liked and mentioned most was the latte that Kane had gotten her. Like Julia, her readers saw the fact that he'd gotten Julia her favorite drink as a seismic shift in Kane. This one action was proof that killing him with kindness was working even better than they had hoped. To Julia's way of thinking, it had taken far longer for that crack to show itself than she would have liked. Nevertheless, she'd take it. Although she hadn't given the Christmas tree incident more than a casual mention, several of the readers picked up on that as well. As far as Julia could tell, Kane didn't oppose Christmas. He wasn't into it. In retrospect, that made sense. For many years now, it had been just him and his grandfather. It wasn't like he had an extended list of people that he needed to shop for or a big family. Knowing what she did, she had an idea. As soon as she finished her shift, Julia took the bus to the manor house to see Kane's grandfather. She packed the last of her homemade chocolate chip cookies to bring him that morning, but that was an excuse to seek him out a second time in as many days. Sharon, the woman who was at the reception desk at the manor house, smiled when she saw Julia. "You're starting to become a regular, aren't you?" "Yes, I am," Julia called out as she rushed past. "Bernie's room in 316, isn't he?" "Probably not." She skipped a stop. "Oh, is he up in the game room again?" "Could be. Check there first." "Will do. Thanks." With a wave of a jaunty step, Julia was off to the 5th floor. Sure enough, she found Bernie sitting at the table working on that same jigsaw puzzle he had been there the day before. 2 men were off in the corner playing cribbage, she noticed. Bernie glanced up when he saw her, and his face immediately broke into a smile. "You're back. Promised you home-baked cookies, didn't I?" "You brought them?" His eyes widened with delight. "I sure did." She set her bag down on the tabletop and brought out the plastic container with the cookies. "You sweetheart, if my grandson was foolish enough to refuse these, then I'll gladly accept them." Right away he peeled off the cover and snatched a cookie. After a single bite he closed his eyes as if tasting ambrosia. "Better than I imagined. Almost as good as the ones my wife baked, God rest her soul." "Thanks." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "I didn't run into Kane this morning." Missing him had weighed on her mind most of the day. It seemed Kane wasn't the only one who had grown accustomed to their morning ritual. "He's sick," Bernie mentioned casually as he reached for a second cookie. "Sick?" She was in shock. "I saw him last night. He seemed well enough then." Cookie in his hand, Bernie looked up. "What time was that?" "I don't remember. Around 7, I think. Why?" "Wasn't feeling great then either. He usually stops by Sunday afternoon, but he didn't want to give me whatever it was that upset his stomach. Surprised he didn't mention it when he saw you. He helped me haul my Christmas tree up the stairs." Then, because she felt as she needed to explain, she added the elevator was out of order. "Talked to him this morning, and he sounded sicker than a dog. From what he said, he spent most of the day in bed. Guess it's the flu." "Oh, dear." Julia immediately felt terrible. From what little she knew of Kane being told that he wasn't a man who took easily to being ill. "You okay?" Bernie asked. "Fine." She brought her head back to the present. "I had an idea. Don't know if you and Kane have plans for Christmas Day." "Nothing more than dinner right here at the manor house. What makes you ask?" "How about you come to my apartment? I'll be alone, and it would be a good excuse for me to cook." "You a good cook?" "Good enough. Living alone, I don't get much practice," she explained, "but I have my mother and grandmother's recipes for Christmas." She welcomed the excuse to host dinner for Bernie and Kane. "You going to serve more than these cookies?" "I can make that happen." "Turkey and the fixins?" "Whatever you want," she assured Bernie. "Count me in," he chuckled. "What's so funny?" You being kind to Kane and me reaping the benefits." Julia smiled. "Kane might refuse once he finds out it's me, you know." "Let him. If that boy wants to turn down a good home-cooked Christmas dinner, then he can, but I'm no fool." Julia glanced at her wrist for the time. She was scheduled to be at the Boys and Girls Club to help with their practice for the holiday program. "Got a scoot," she said. "Thanks again," Bernie said as she collected the person bag. "You feel free to stop by any time." "Will do. You don't even need to bring cookies. Your pretty smile is enough to brighten this old man's day." Julia had taken an instant liking to Bernie, just like Sharon claimed. He was a real sweetheart. Leaning forward, she kissed his cheek. "I'll visit again soon." Bernie pressed his hand to his cheek. "Not shaving for a week," he told her, grinning ear to ear. The practice with the kids at the Boys and Girls Club went well. Julia accompanied them on the piano as they rehearsed their songs for the program, which was scheduled for the night of December 23rd. She came to know a number of children involved and admired the staff. Julia was grateful for the opportunity to volunteer. She liked the work they did with the neighborhood kids and enjoyed making this one small contribution. "Really appreciate this," Jeremy Craig said when the practice was over. They dated briefly earlier in this year, but nothing serious. Julia liked him well enough, and he seemed to feel the same, but there wasn't a spark between them, and it was foolish to pretend that there was. "Glad to do it. You know that?" Jeremy hugged her and walked her to the exit. "You walking again?" "It's only a few blocks. Not sure that I'm comfortable with that." "Jeremy, it's perfectly safe. This is a good neighborhood, and I've never had a hint of a problem. The streets are well lit, and there's hundreds of businesses along the way. Nothing is going to happen." Okay. "Besides, I've taken karate classes." But that had been a few years back, and she had to stop them after 3 lessons. The way she figured, when the time came and she needed to defend herself, her training would kick in. She hoped that wouldn't be necessary, but if it was, she would be prepared, she hoped. On the walk home, Julia passed the deli, where she often grabbed something quick for dinner. The owners knew her by her first name. Although she wasn't especially hungry, she went inside. Right away, Levi acknowledged her with a raise of the arm, and it was past dinner hour, and business had slowed to a few lingering patrons, eyeing the variety of selections behind the glass case. "What do you have that's good?" Julia asked, looking through the case herself. Levi made the best salads imaginable, but she had a weakness for his soups, which he cooked daily himself. "What I got that's good?" he repeated in a heavy New York accent. "Everything is good." "True enough." He leaned against the case, his weight on his hands, as he waited for her to make her selection. "What's the soup today?" "Chicken noodle." Julia's head came up. Chicken noodle soup was exactly what Kane needed. "Give me a quart of that." 1 quart of soup coming up. Julia scanned the salads, but nothing appealed to her. "Anything else I can get you?" "I'm good." Julia remained full from lunch. She boiled herself a couple of eggs once she got home. She paid for the soup, and her steps were filled with purpose, and she headed back home. Getting the soup to Kane while it was still hot was a priority. Once inside the building, she dropped her coat off and purse at the apartment and went directly across the hall to Kane's. Schroeder probably needed to be walked too. She would volunteer to do that as well. She knocked on the front door, no response. "Kane, it's me," she called, pressing her ear to the door. Sure enough, she heard him moving on the other side. "That's supposed to entice me to open my door?" he grumbled. She couldn't let him know that she knew he was sick. "Come on, open up," she said when he ignored her summons. "Go away," he told her. "Not going to happen. I want to know why you didn't meet me at the elevator this morning." "Why do you care? I'm avoiding you." "No, you are not. If you remember, we specifically talked about it, and I want to know what's up." The lock turned, and he cracked open the door. "I'm sick." She exhaled a deep sigh as if this wasn't news to her. "I thought that must be the case." "Why'd you think that?" The door remained only slightly ajar, just enough for him to talk to her without shouting. Like I said, I just figured something had to be wrong when you weren't at the elevator this morning. Now, are you going to talk through a crack in the door, or are you going to let me in?" "No, go away." "What about Schroeder? Doesn't he need to go out? The building manager took him out." "Come on, Kane, I thought we were past this. Let me in." He grumbled something underneath his breath that she didn't quite hear. From what she could make out, it was a good thing that she didn't pick up on all of it. Reluctantly, Kane opened the door all the way, and she entered the apartment. When she did, she stopped short. "Whoa, you look horrible." And he did. He was deathly pale, his eyes were rheumy. And it wasn't enough that his hair was a mess. He wore his sweats as if he was fighting a chill. His feet were covered in white sports socks. "Okay, you've verified. Now I'm sick, and now leave." She held up a container of soup. "I brought you dinner. Don't want it. Now go." Julia set her hand on her hip. "Why are you so anxious to be rid of me? Well, other than that you've never been all that happy to see me." He frowned as if to say that wasn't entirely true. Not any longer. She doubted he'd ever admit that, but the look on his face said it for him. In case you haven't figured it out, I have the flu. Do you want it too? No worries, I had my own flu shot. Not wanting to argue with him, she wove her way around him and stepped into the kitchen, which was in bad shape. Dishes filled the sink and food items were spread across the counter, including used tea bags and multiple cups. Ignoring the mess, Julia brought down a bowl. Julia, I'm serious. So am I. She said over her shoulder. She set the bowl down in the container of soup on the counter, pried off the lid, and right away the room filled with an aroma of chicken noodles. Have you had anything to eat today? She asked as if the bowl filled the bowl with hot soup. No. That's what I thought. Sit. Motioned toward the counter where he grumbled to take all his meals. Again he grumbled, but he did as she asked. She stood on the other side of the counter, opened and closed the drawers until she found the silverware that she handed him a spoon. Glaring at her, Kane took a tentative sip of the soup while Julia watched him. His look suggested that the faster he ate, the faster he could be rid of her. So, she asked with her hands braced against the edge of the counter. So what? Hits the spot, right? He nodded, guessed that was a victory, although a small one. I need to lie down. You should. His sofa was a mess. He apparently spent the majority of his day there. Without asking, she went over to the couch and folded up the blanket and fluffed up the pillows. When did you turn into a regular Florence Nightingale? He asked as he made his way to the sofa. She checked her watch. About 10 minutes ago. I'll be right back. She left and returned a few minutes later with yellow rubber gloves, a plastic bucket, and a cleaning disinfectant. What are you doing now? Cleaning. His frown was ferocious. Don't. She glared back at him. You're going to do it anyway, aren't you? Yes. He closed his eyes and groaned. If I had the strength, I'd argue with you. You'd lose, so save your breath. His apartment was the mirror opposite of her own, so she knew right where to go. Julia, he shouted with a cutting edge to his voice, you're upsetting me. I know. I'll be done with these dishes in a minute, and then I'll take Schroeder out. It seemed all the fight had gone out of him. Okay, a couple of moments later he shouted, I thought you said you were nearly finished. What are you doing now? Nothing. He was up from the sofa following her around. Kane closed his eyes as if battling with himself. God save me from this stubborn woman. Pray harder, she told him cheerfully as she went about remaking his bed, straightening his coverings. For a moment it looked like he wasn't going to move. He blocked her path out of the bedroom. I hope you know that if I wasn't so weak, I wouldn't put up with this. I know you helped me, and I'm simply returning the favor. When did I help you? How quickly one forgot. With the tree, remember? You carried it up the stairs for me and helped me set it up. He rolled his eyes as if to discount what he had done. I really appreciate it. We had a nice conversation, too. His frown now was firmly in place. I don't appreciate this. Didn't think you would. It went without saying if circumstances were any different, he would never have put her up with the pushy behavior. You finished the soup? His answer was clipped and sharp. Yes. Good. Bet you feel better, too. Taking the fifth on that. She grinned. Figured you would. I don't need you fussing over me, and I definitely don't want you getting sick, so go away. Julia's heart leapt at his words. You don't want me to get sick? So nice that you care. Cut the bull, Julia. What I need is rest and sleep, and you're disturbing both. Give me a few more minutes, and then I'll leave you in peace. Deal? I've been sick before. I know what it feels like. His shoulders sagged. In that case, leave. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Anything you say, sir. He cracked a smile, although she could see that he struggled not to let her know that he was amused. You're a pain in the butt. Kane waited by the front door until she finished stacking the dishes in the dishwasher and turned it on. What's taking you so long? He demanded. Patience, my dear man, patience. In case you haven't figured it out, that's in short supply. Sort of guessed as much, she said as she moved out of the hallway. I'll be back in 30 minutes with Schroeder. Just go. She was actually enjoying this. I'm only trying to help. You would do the same for me. No, I wouldn't. Yes, you would. Now where's Schroeder's leash? Top drawer in the laundry room. His impatience was clearly evident. Just go, would you? I need to lie down again. I'm feeling a bit dizzy. Do you need any help? What I need is to lie down, which I can't do with you irritating me. She left Schroeder and placed her arm around his waist. Let me help you back to the sofa. It surprised her when he didn't make a fuss and allowed her to lead him across the room. He sank down onto the sofa, and Julia had to admit that he looked dreadful. She found it hard to leave him and looked for ways to linger. I thought you were going to walk the dog. I am. She didn't have an excuse to delay any longer. As she promised, she took Schroeder for a walk, and when she returned, she found Kane had propped open the door and was asleep on the sofa. For a long time she simply stood there and stared at him, fascinated by him and the shift in their relationship in the last few days. She softened toward him, and he had a change of heart toward her. It was just too subtle. And while they continued to bicker, it was often in jest. He must have felt scrutiny because his eyes fluttered open. Hey, she said softly, sympathetically. I didn't mean to wake you. He blinked a couple more times and stood up. I'm actually feeling better. Not sure if it was the soup or the scent of the pine. Julia smiled. Maybe a bit of both. Maybe. Can I get you anything? Surprisingly, she found herself reluctant to leave. Just as surprisingly, he seemed equally hesitant for her to go. I don't need anything but... He paused. But, she prodded, would you like to watch TV with me? Sure, all in the name of getting to know him better, she told herself. I'll let you decide what to watch as long as it isn't one of those animated Christmas specials. My, aren't you accommodating, she teased. Kane grinned. Don't know that I'm up to watching Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is all. They spent an hour together and sat in companionable silence. In the best of times, Kane wasn't much of a talker, and that was fine. Julia found she enjoyed herself with Schroeder huddled at her feet. Kane thanked her, and when she left, see you in the morning, she said, if you're feeling better, that is. I'm feeling worlds better already. Thanks for the company. She should actually be the one thanking him, only he didn't know that or the reason why. Julia's blog, 12 Days of Christmas, December 19th. Just because I'm nice doesn't mean I'm falling for you. I'm halfway through this adventure, and finally I feel like I'm making substantial headway. My day started off with a disappointment. Ebenezer was a no-show at the elevator, even after he said he'd be there. You read that right. He stood me up. I nearly missed my bus waiting for him. The whole way to work I stewed. It was just like him to pull a stunt like that, leading me to think that he was softening to the pleasure of my company and then pulling this disappearing act. The pleasure of my company is a stretch, but you get my point. Later I discovered that Ebenezer was sick with the flu. I hate to admit how excited I was to learn this, and not for the reasons one might assume. Yes, it explained why I didn't see him in the morning, but it's more than that. What a perfect opportunity to show kindness, right? I couldn't have come up with a better plan if I tried. He wasn't happy to see me, and that is no exaggeration. I brought him chicken and noodle soup, and he ate it, all the while complaining and demanding that I get out of his apartment and leave him alone. I even cleaned for him using disinfectant. Naturally, he was gruff and impatient, which I anticipated. Really, it would have been foolish of me to expect anything less. But here's the kicker. When I quietly returned to his apartment, Ebenezer was dead to the world on the sofa. FYI, he snores. He woke and asked if I'd like to stay and watch television with him. On his couch, just the two of us watching TV for an hour, maybe more. Can't wait to see what day 7 turns up. And I hope that you turn in tomorrow for Chapter 7. Thank you. And remember, on World Kindness Day, do an act of kindness. And we'll continue tomorrow on World Kindness Day with more of 12 Days of Christmas. Thank you.